Gestalt Psychology. Gestalt Psychology was at the forefront of the cognitive psychology. It served as the foundation of the cognitive perspective to learning. It opposed the external and mechanistic focus of behaviorism. It considered the mental processes and products of perceptions. So let's take a look to this advanced organizer about Gestalt Psychology. So let's examine the pictures below. Is there the possibility of you and me together in the first picture? Do you sense good or evil in the second picture? Do you get the optical and the illusion in the last picture? So these are just some illustrations that challenge our perceptual skills. So what is Gestalt Psychology? So Gestalt Psychology is a theory that looks at human perceptions. The term Gestalt means form or configuration. Gestalt theory was the initial cognitive response to behaviorism. It emphasized the importance of sensory holes in the dynamic nature of visual perception. So they are the psychologists who studied perception and concluded that learners are not passive but rather active. Wolfgang Köhler was a German psychologist and phenomenologist, one of the contributors to the creation of Gestalt psychology. Kurt Koepka was a German psychologist and professor. Max Wertheimer was an Austro-Hungarian psychologist who was one of the three founders of Gestalt psychology. We have 6 Gestalt Principles. First, the law of proximity. Elements that are closer together will be perceived as a coherent object. Second, law of similarity. Elements that look similar will be perceived as part of the same form. Third, law of closure. We tend to fill the gaps or close the figures we perceive. We enclose a space by completing a contour and ignoring gaps in the figure. Next, law of good continuation. Individuals have the tendency to continue contours whenever the elements of the pattern establish an implied direction. People tend to draw a good continuous line. Then next, law of good pragnanz. Based on our experiences with perception, we expect certain patterns and therefore perceive that expected pattern. And lastly, law of figure or ground. We tend to pay attention and perceive things in the foreground first. A stimulus will be perceived as separate from its ground. Application of Gestalt Principles to teaching and learning process. Law of proximity. Related concepts or lessons should be taught aligned or closely to each other. This is the reason why subtraction is taught after addition, multiplication after subtraction, then division after multiplication. Because can you imagine teaching addition then jumping directly to polygons? Law of similarity. Similar lessons or content should be grouped together to make learners develop understanding more efficiently and effectively. That's why lessons are grouped into units. Closure. When a concept or topic is incomplete, thus isn't closed. Incomplete information may make learners want to discover what's missing rather than concentrating on the given instruction. So, if students find a math algorithm confusing because a certain question is left unanswered or a step isn't clear, they will tend to concentrate on that confused part of the process rather than the total process as a whole. Law of good continuation. Lessons should be presented in such a way that learners will see this as connected and continuous. Now, you know why we have the review part of the lesson plan. This way, students will realize that their new lesson actually has continuity and is related to what they actually know in the previous lesson. Law of good pragnanz. Pragnanz states that when things are grasped as wholes, the minimal amount of energy is exerted in thinking. In short, make your lesson holistic, complete, and most of all, simple. Law of figure or ground. For a figure to be perceived, it must stand out from the background. Emphasis should be done on important aspects of the lesson. For example, teachers should vary the tone of their voice or write boldly or underline the important keywords of the lesson. Gestalt psychology adheres to the idea of learning taking place by discovery or insight. The idea of insight learning was first developed by Wolfgang Köhler, in which he described experiments with apes where the apes could use boxes and sticks as tools to solve problems. So in the box problem, a banana is attached to the top of a chimpanzee's cage. The banana is out of reach but can be reached by climbing on and jumping from a box. Sultan could solve this problem. So a much more difficult problem which involved the stacking of boxes was introduced by Cooler. So this problem required the ape to stack one box on another and master gravitational problems by building a stable stack. Cooler also gave the ape sticks which they used to rake food into the cage. Sultan, Cooler's very intelligent ape, was able to master a two-stick problem by inserting one into the end of the other in order to reach the food. So in these problems, the important aspect of learning was not reinforcement, but the coordination of thinking to create new organization. So Cooler referred to this behavior as insight or discovery learning. Hence, teachers must make use of discovery approach in learning. Teachers can use experiments, laboratory, and inquiry-based strategies. Other psychologists like Kurt Lewin expounded on Gestalt Psychology. So his theory focusing on life space adhered to Gestalt Psychology. Kurt Lewin was a German-American psychologist known as one of the modern pioneers of social organizational and applied psychology in the United States. He said that an individual has inner and outer forces that affects his perception and also his learning. Gestalt psychology helped introduce the idea that human perception is not just about seeing what is actually present in the world around us. It is heavily influenced by our motivations and expectations. So thank you for listening and hope you learned something.